Hello. So I have the first item on the agenda. I already brought it up to Rachel in our one-on-one doc, and she mentioned there that we should talk about it, but perhaps it's better to talk about it with everybody. We have this long-standing issue where Gitaly Canary is alerting on us, and that's because our repositories are there and they're very busy. Every time we look into it, we find a different mold to whack, and this is a bit never ending. So I wanted to bring it up here to maybe discuss what would be a better approach rather than just chasing this all the time.
I think the biggest problem, which we've talked about before, is that Gitaly Canary is two things. It's a Canary deployment of the Gitaly code, but it is also storing the repositories that we use heavily. It's very hard to, I don't know from the Gitaly team perspective, but it seems like it's very hard to disentangle especially when we've got a bunch of alert silence, what behavior on Gitaly Canary is because it's running new code, and what behavior on Gitaly Canary is because it's using these high traffic repositories. So I don't think it's very useful as a canary. I think it's useful to us to have a thing that says oh, this is the performance on.
I'm not sure it's useful at all because we don't look at the alerts. Does it do a canary job at all?
Well, I look at the alerts and the issue when it pops up, I see if there's anything newish there, like something that I didn't recognize before, but that's not super useful because...
How often do we actually find a problem? Like a Gitaly problem and not our repo is too busy problem?
I think most of the things that we fixed, we haven't actually, those were Rails Rails calling Gitaly problems.
So it could be that Gitaly doesn't even need a canary, and because there's another thing that comes to mind for me is that I think the reason we got here is that we realized that we kept getting alerts on the GitLab or GitLab repo, and we thought if we put it on its own Gitaly server, then it doesn't bother other people. And then we turned the alerts off, and then we all went home. But
when you did that, was it a canary installation? Was the code different on when it was first separated?
I'm not sure. It could also be that. So I'm not really sure why you had a canary. Another issue here is the order of deploys and the tight coupling between the Gitaly version and the Rails version. And I think at one point we had a rule where we said you should always deploy Gitaly before you deploy Rails. I think actually this is why it happened, now that I think back. When doing a deploy, upgrade Gitaly before you upgrade Rails, because in Rails we never account for the fact that maybe we're talking to an older version of Gitaly. Rails always assumes it's talking to the latest version of Gitaly or something newer. So then we wanted to have a canary Rails. We had a problem because that would talk to an old Gitaly. So then we created a canary Gitaly that we can deploy ahead of canary Rails, just from a correctness and compatibility viewpoint. I think Jarv would also know. I think he was involved in this. I think that's why it happened. So not so much because we wanted canary alerts about Gitaly, but because we wanted a canary Rails, and we couldn't have one without a canary Gitaly. And then GitLab was its own problem, and we chucked it on there. And then, yeah, we just taped the red light. That's where we are now.
So when we say it was its own problem, do you mean that it was just causing alerts and noise and things to be looked at that were distracting them from what actual problems were, because the usage of it is so different?
Yeah.
We were a very noisy neighbor for other people, so putting
we constantly had people constantly getting paged on that server where GitHub or GitLab was on, and I know there was a discussion and there was something slightly iffy about moving it, but it was some sort of pragmatic decision, like we're probably better off to put it there and not make it everybody else's problem. I could try and find that issue.
So next question, are the SLIs the same on both main and canary?
I think that's the problem.
That was going to be my next question, is do they have to be?
I think they shouldn't be, because it. Actually, I also think we've had this discussion before somewhere. But on a big GitLab server with lots of different repositories, you're sort of seeing an average across a lot of different things. But on GitLab Canary, where it's just GitHub or GitLab, it reflects the performance of that one repo a lot, and that repo is used very heavily. So it probably needs its own SLIs. That's the short answer.
When you say the performance of the repo, is our usage of this repo so specific, so particular, that there is no other repo on GitLab.com that behaves like this?
A little bit. I mean, we also have marquee customer GitLab servers. In a way, GitLab Canary is the marquee customer, is the marquee GitLab server for ourselves.
But on the marquee GitLab servers, they have the same SLIs.
This is exactly the right question, I think. I don't know. We should be doing, I think we should treat this as a marquee customer. We should treat ourselves as a marquee customer and use the same approach and rules. And then, yeah.
Well, that's an interesting approach that we can take, because I feel like playing whack-a-mole forever is never, well, I mean, it's forever, it's never, but there's always going to be something else that comes up. And that's why I thought it was better to talk about this from a more fundamental perspective, because if it's fundamentally different, then maybe we need to, be treating it differently. Maybe these SLIs do need to be different. And I think finding out what the marquee customer situation is good.
Because that's your question, like, are we unique? No, we're not unique. Well, what's unique about us is that it's a busy repo and we care if performance is bad. Because for the most part, we ignore if people's performance is bad because we're blind to it or we're deaf to it. We don't hear it if their Git performance is bad, so we just ignore it. But if GitLab or GitLab CI is stuck, then people on Slack start clamoring and then we do something about it. Okay, that's a very crude way of putting it, but I think it is more or less true that we have a hard time observing what the user experience is at the individual level, and we look more at the system of how is this server doing, and is this server doing it fine most of the time. And if there is 10,000 users that are on that server, then that doesn't mean that all 10,000 of them are happy. And that's also what marquee customers are about. Those are people that where if they're not happy, we actually have to do something about it because there's a big contract behind it. Which again, it sounds very cynical, but I hope you understand what I mean.
What about the things that we have, like looking into this once in a while has made us improve things for everyone?
Yeah, no, we should make it better. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but we should probably treat this the same way we treat marquee performance.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a canary. Like,
no, I think that's an accident because, well, also if there's nothing on the canary server, then if it doesn't get any traffic, then you get nothing from it. So let's just give it one of the biggest chunks of traffic we have.
One of the issues that Andrew created recently is to start doing, to start using the distributed read stuff that GitLab has there, and then it is kind of a canary if we try out new stuff there.
Yeah, but then if it turns out that that works really well, then we probably want to do that for our marquee customers too. So it could be sort of a staging, advanced test area for what the marquee servers should be like. But I mean, the question is again, like, why aren't alerts going off on marquee servers all the time, and why are things better there?
Because it's quieter, I think.
On the marquee servers or on ours?
On the marquee ones.
I find that hard to imagine.
Well, I think that's worthwhile investigating, because I think that asking the question about the difference between this and a marquee server might give some interesting answers, because the idea behind it is the same. Like, you want to have a certain types of usage isolated, but then what is different about the usage? Like, what makes this different? And yeah, I think that understanding more about how the marquee servers are used is probably a good line of investigation here.
I'll comment that on the issue and see if we can take it in that direction.
Huamin, for context, a marquee server is somewhere where specific customers have been identified to be moved on to specific sets of hardware. So instead of having everyone all together, we've isolated certain customers on request onto specific hardware to try and isolate noisy neighbor problems. So that's why we're talking about having our own repositories on a separate server, because it seems to follow the same pattern of isolating ourselves as a customer onto specific hardware. We just added the whole complexity of let's also make this a canary installation, which is like a pre-release available as well, which yeah, probably muddies the waters a bit here.
I think an actually useful Gitly canary would probably just be an arbitrary regular Gitly server. And that, like Jakob said, this one should be like a marquee server. And then we have two sort of dimensions to think about that on. But I think if you're talking about pre-release code, then that probably makes more sense.
So what you're saying is yeah, have specific repos, well, have a selection of arbitrary repos that test out a pre-release, but then treat ourselves like a marquee customer so that we are seeing what is happening on marquee servers as well.
Yes, so in terms of like new Gitly deployments, and again, I don't know from the Gitly perspective if this is even like an important thing to the Gitly team, but in terms of like new deployments, I think because they have to be coupled to repos because that's how Gitly is deployed, isn't it? Then it will make more sense for it to just be like, you know, if we said that, because I think we're trying to move towards Canary just being like 5% of traffic goes to Canary or whatever, right? That would be the closest we could get, is to like deliberately pick up not remarkable.
I think maybe we need to talk to people on the delivery team about this, because this whole aspect of what gets deployed when is kind of complicated, and that's something that is really their focus. I'm not even sure if this strict, well, not sure why it would be gone, but this strict relation between deploy Gitly before Rails, I don't know if that's still true. But if we had an arbitrary Gitly server act as the canary server, then that would usually get non-canary Rails traffic, and that would probably work, but then we still want canary Rails traffic to go somewhere. And I'm not really sure how that puzzle works. Like I said, I think delivery are the best guess of people who know how that puzzle works out.
Well, I think this issue impacts them as well. So perhaps when we start talking about these questions, we should ping them as well and ask them to help think about how we resolve this, or how we take the next steps here.
And another possibility is that we're stuck with this being the canary Gitly server for practical reasons, but that we can still say we run it as if it's a marquee server. We apply the same standards, SLIs, alerting, or whatever is in place for marquee. We treat it the same. And maybe we already do, but right now we don't know.
Yeah, and I think finding out is important. I think finding those things out are the first steps here to decide what to do next. Because yeah, I'm just loath to spend more time just bashing the biggest problem, as they seem to come up every week or two for what the next different thing is.
I think every time a new person goes on triage and looks into that issue, it gets brought up.
And the other thing is, I think you saw that it was find commit, Bob. Again.
Yeah, but
did you say that?
Where? I haven't looked farther into it to see which find commit that was, because that's used all over the place.
Oh, right. But what I mean is, like, find commit itself gets dramatically slower when you have a bunch of concurrent requests that all use find commit. So like that's like we can remove find commit calls to like reduce the amount of concurrent requests, but I think the Gitly behavior is probably not great either. So yeah.
Yeah, we try to do smart things to make that more efficient, but it's still not great. It's already the case that if you do multiple find commits with the same correlation ID, we reuse one process, so the process startup time should be amortized. But if you have concurrent requests with different correlation IDs, then they still start up their own process, sort of.
Right. That's
On
why the
purpose.
dramatic
Yeah.
change.
Oh yeah, probably. So it used to be that every request got its own fresh cat file process, and that was slow. And then we came up with this thing, but yeah, it's still not great.
Because on the Rails side, we also have the ability to do a request cache for find commit results, which is effectively the same as the Gitly side, because like the request will have the same correlation ID. So we've kind of solved that problem, that part of the problem from two sides.
Yeah. It's yeah, Git leak and Git caching is an interesting problem, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's on our agenda to work on that. And I don't think it's a problem we ever really solved well. When we started the Gitly project, I pushed back on having that in scope because I think just getting Gitly working was hard enough. But the result is that there's not a, it hasn't been explored much, and it's one of those things that it spans across multiple components and across the whole application, and we're maybe just not doing it right or in the right place.
Yeah, I think a while ago I created an MR that would enable this ref caching everywhere, but then the problem was I wanted to use the MR to see what specs broke, to like get an idea of like, is this feasible? But the problem is that most of the spec failures were like spec failures. Like, you know, like in a real situation, this wouldn't be a problem. But in the context of the spec, where like the spec is like, you know, doing one thing, then immediately running a request and expecting to get a different result, like, you know, it's another one, because like, you know, in the specs, the request context is the whole spec, for simplicity. So basically I didn't pursue it any further. Is what I'm saying there.
It might be an interesting problem and an impactful problem to try and do something about, but to me, it's also like a really big problem, and you need to, maybe it's just a spec problem. Maybe I don't know exactly what technical solution you're talking about now.
Yeah, but even then, that doesn't solve the problem
now.
of like multiple concurrent requests doing find commit, which is the other issue, the other side of the issue. So yeah, that was just a real tangent. Sorry.
But well, it is an important tangent, because the real reason we constantly have these alerts and we have all these problems is that there is so much more we can do to make Git access more efficient in GitLab. And I think that would be very impactful, because look at the server that's constantly not meeting its targets.
I think I agree that like there's a lot more that we could potentially do to make the access faster, and I think it's a case of deciding if that's the right thing to do. And I think that starting with the path of finding out the difference between this and the marquee nodes, determining the best use of Canary, and then it might be that keeping the arrangement as it is actually the right thing to do, because then it does enable us to then look at this, like how we can improve the usage across the board. We just have to decide if that's the most like the best use of the time, given that it's mainly us that seem to do this. And I know that making improvements for us, it makes an improvement for everyone, because it's all the same thing underneath.
Yeah, we will think, I'm still optimistic about our next project with the pack file caching, and I think it will make some of these things better, but it will not make them go away, because it's just such a busy repo, and it's not the only thing we're not efficient at.
You mean you haven't built magic?
Well, I haven't built anything. Well, I haven't built proof of concept.
So you're still proving magic, got it.
I think we need more than one kind of magic.
Is the magic that we need to make in Git or in Gitly?
My gut feeling is that this magic is more in the Rails level. It would be avoiding Gitly calls in the first place.
I think ZJ mentioned that before as well. Like, if you think about Postgres, obviously Postgres does some clever stuff with like buffers and so on to like, have frequently used rows in memory. But basically, if we want a database query to be quick, then we cache the result on the Rails side, because the Rails side knows how it's using that and knows when it can invalidate that. And I think the same applies to Gitly.
I think Active
Invalidation is a
Record
hard
is
problem.
doing that right now, like the query cache thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like if it's exactly the same query, then Active Record does it. But I mean, if you want to cache it across requests, then you do that in Rails. You don't say to Postgres, like, let's.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because that is, I was talking about me pushing back on caching in Gitly, but that's also one of the reasons for pushing back, is that it keeps whatever Gitly says is authoritative, and that's what actually in the is in the repo. And knowing when you can ignore what's in the repo and serve something stale instead is complex. And yeah, so it's a Rails, but it's yeah, I don't know. I mean, in the past I would have maybe said create or source code owns this, because they own the Rails code that touches Git repositories, but I'm not really sure if that's practically true, because they are not like a lot of parts of the application care about stuff that is in repositories. So it might be a little bit like this is one of those, like Sidekick efficiency is one of those things that is important, but somehow too big or not clearly owned in the Rails application.
I think that's also one of those things that seems to be highlighted by scale and size, because it's being highlighted on our repo and not so much on others. And I was wondering, sorry, Sean, yeah?
I think it is more clearly owned in the Rails application, because only a few teams, like, there's a source code team that, like, deals with like how Rails like accesses Git repositories, like essentially. So I know that other teams do that as well, but I think they would be the natural owners. Like they've got a lot on, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, but
does anyone know if there are already proposals and ideas for what the enhancements are, or is everyone just saying, well, there's something that needs to be done, but there's not the clear, like, these are the ideas that people are putting forward?
I think one of the things that Sean linked there, well, both of them actually are ideas to improve stuff, the concurrent requests and the caching on the Rails side.
So I suppose after we've done the investigations here about the SLIs and the marquee notes, when it comes to now talking about how to move forward, it's about getting source code involved with us and working with them to try and see what can be done next. But I think it also depends very much on what we find with the marquee nodes and the comparisons there.
Yeah, and there's another interesting angle here, which is not about jumping in and trying to fix the problem, and that's about observability. Because it's very observable what Gitly does, because you have these RPC calls and we log them and we know how long they take. But what happens, how often something in the application tries to look up a commit is a kind of RPC, could be an RPC call. Like there might be, there's stuff that the application tries to get out of the repository, and then there's the things that actually get sent and asked from Gitly. But what's happening in the Rails app as we try to access a repository is maybe not as observable.
What
And
would you add there? Because we already logged the number of Gitly calls and so on per request.
so it's not about the
But we
Gitly
don't
calls, but
know
it's
which
about
ones.
the things that one commits and what the patterns are there, and things that want the same commits, and do they hit a cache in Rails, or does it become a Gitly call? Like it. Yeah, I'm not sure if I can express the clear idea
Yeah,
clearly.
no, you mean like how many times does the Rails do find commit, and how many times does it actually go to Gitly, and how many times does it hit the cache? I used find commit, but whatever, like anything.
Yeah, what does the
Rails.
behavior look like? What are the patterns? What are the opportunities for optimizing? Like if we see that something gets repeated all the time, and we're like, and you know, I'm not like, can we make the, well, I suppose we can make the argument it's not efficient enough by just pointing to the number of Gitly calls and say that needs to go down. So
No,
at that point that side we know enough.
I think you're trying to get us like to add InfluxDB again with the method calls thing.
Not intentionally, but now that you mention it, yes, that is maybe what I'm describing, and probably not what we want to be doing. We used to have observability inside the Ruby code, where Ruby method calls would get tracked, and we would dump crazy amounts of data into InfluxDB to see what the application is doing, and we had to stop that because we were generating too much data. And that's why Bob is suggesting maybe we shouldn't go there again.
Can I ask one question? So what is the current status of the tracing on the production? I saw that we use the LabKit Ruby for tracing and stuff. So is it get deployed into production and we can get the data from that? Or is that in my local environment?
Like we have tracing, like the Jaeger tracing is enabled in staging right now, if I remember correctly, but it's not yet in production. I can dig up an epic where Igor is working on getting.
Yeah, Igor's working on that, and I think that's a good point. Like, it feels like we're punting a few things to that, but like, you know, it would be nice to revisit some of these things once we have tracing enabled in production and see if that like lets us find out the answers to these things without going and building our own thing.
Yeah.
On top of that. Yeah, if you can find the epic, Bob, I'm not having a great amount of success at the moment.
So tracing is in a strange state because the work started 1 or 2 years ago, but it never, like deploying it into production stalled for a very long time. And it is moving now, but it's still not there. That's why in local development, you can see tracing and it's like, hey, we have tracing. And then why isn't it in production? Because
yeah, actually on the local environment, I only raised it to Rachel that it is not very helpful to see how the code is behaving. So I think that if we have like enhance the observability in the tracing, we can just like have a really clear vision about how things and how our application is doing on production. Maybe we can show some sampling about 0.5% or even with the long running cost, and we can get the data from that. So maybe it's really helpful in long term.
I think I agree. These arguments are much, if we want to argue that something can be improved and we have tracing data, that would be easier.
Yeah.
And Andrew has just joined for his favorite subject, distributed tracing.
Hello.
Welcome.
Sorry, I was on an incident. Lots of fun this morning. Hi. Do you say Kwang Min?
Yes, Kwang Min. Hi, I'm the new team member in the Scalability team.
Yeah, I know. I'm very excited that you've joined. Welcome.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
And you. Cool.
So, Andrew,
so what was
can you give us an update for what is the status of distributed tracing in production?
So it's actually very close. There's a readiness review that's currently underway, and like where should I paste it? Sorry, I don't have the doc open. Give me a sec. So it's running in staging. So where can I place? I'm just going to. So we have Jaeger in staging. Like, I think from an expectation setting point of view, it's very early days, right? So if you look at the staging traces, there's a lot of stuff in there that I think we should clean up, and I've got some open MRs to kind of clean up some of them. Like, for example, we have, like, most of it's health checks at the moment because we have so many health check requests and they're all getting traced, and we should turn that off. And obviously we want to go to remote sampling and all these features, but as a sort of MVC, we should have it in really soon, depending on when that's, I think hopefully it'll make the production change log at the end of the year. So otherwise it'll be early January that we'll have tracing in production, and it will make a massive difference. Who was somebody just advocating for it right now? Or why was this topic brought up?
Oh, we just wanted to invoke you and get you to join the call.
Where we got to was we started talking about the fact that we still have alerts silenced on GitLab Canary. We had a conversation about what we could do that's slightly different there, and some investigation that we have to do. And then, sorry, well, just to get to the answer of how distributed tracing got there. And then one man brought up, well, we have distributed tracing locally. Is this not in production yet? Because that might give us some more guidance. So, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I had a call with Jarv and Maren yesterday about this, because the other problem is that we have affinity for certain projects for Canary. So if you go to GitLab or GitLab, by default, if you don't have any other setting, it will opt you into Canary. Whereas if you go to like F-Droid or another open source project, it will by default opt out of Canary. And so because we're driving Canary web traffic to the Web Canary, which then goes to the GitLab Canary, it has a knock-on effect. So we have silences on like web alerts for Canary, which are also very unhealthy. And so there was a discussion on maybe Monday between Maren and Jarv and myself, and we spoke about either breaking up that opt-out scheme that we have on the web, but Maren was very against that. Basically, what I'm against is having the silences. And one of the things that we spoke about was, you know, basically the repository is slightly pathological, the main repository on Canary, and it's always going to be slow. And because we don't get this kind of normal mixture of traffic, I'm just taking a look there. Rachel's put a bit around there. It's very problematic. So one of the things that we're talking about is, until we get the clone sharing, or whatever, the pack file sharing, or whatever we're calling it, one of the things that we should consider is moving GitLab org GitLab to Prefect and replacing it on the GitLab Canary with a bunch of other GitLab traffic, because we're the best testers of GitLab. However, it only makes sense on Prefect if we also have distributed reads, and that is not on at the moment. So distributed reads in GitLab cluster would share the reads out between multiple Prefect nodes. And so we might be able to reduce the load that we see on those nodes by sharing it between 3 nodes. But that's also like a beta feature at the moment.
How is what we were wondering, and what you maybe know, is like, how is the GitLab or GitLab different from, or how's GitLab Canary different from marquee GitLab servers? Because I presume those are also high traffic repos with special needs. And do they have different SLIs? Why don't we get alerts from them all the time?
So actually the marquee servers are very, like, the historical reason why we even have those marquee servers was because there was a horrible performance bug in GitLab, and it was getting worse and worse and worse, and our most valued customers were getting the angriest, and so we were moving them onto very low utilization machines. And so the marquee machines are actually very low utilization, and we never kind of completed that and moved more people on there. It was really an emergency.
They're over provisions.
Effort. Yeah, they're very over provisioned. So the marquee machines are, there's outstanding work tasks to resolve that. But the GitLab or GitLab, it's just down to the number of CI jobs, the number of clones.
Can we over provision that server too?
I was just trying to find the issue that I wrote down all the options. Let me just find it for you. It's too many issues.
So my thinking is the reason we don't get alerts about the marquee servers all the time is because they're over provisioned. So they can just handle whatever we throw at them.
So that was the first option that I listed, and it's kind of like it's an either or between that and prefect or GitLab cluster. I think, are we calling it GitLab cluster now? It seems to be sort of getting traction.
I think prefect is just a component
okay.
Is the routing component.
Okay. So here I wrote down all of those. It sounds like we had the same conversation. Yeah, that's thanks. Put that in there. But there's a note where we just kind of describe all the options, and that machine has got 30 cores at the moment. And if you go look through the metrics, it's totally CPU saturated. So it can take up to 1.5 times the amount of time it's able to do work to schedule the work on a CPU, which is bad.
So is there a reason why we haven't considered just provisioning more before? Like, I'm surprised.
Well, we've already done it once. So that machine is already bigger than, so if you look at the normal GitLab fleet, they are N1 standard 32s or N1 standard somethings. And that machine is a C2 or C3 or whatever. 30.
And what are marquee?
And the marquee are also the N1 standards. So
they are normal servers with just one repo on them.
And so we've already switched over once to a compute optimized, whatever the latest Intel processors
so that means we are special because we are on a bigger server than everybody else, and it's still constantly saturated.
Yeah, but we did get a bit of headroom. So we kind of got a bit of headroom, and for the most part, the pre-clone script helps us. But then there's like security releases, and they're not going against master, and we have all these other things that are going on that the pre-clone script doesn't cover, and which is again like why I keep banging on about the pack file thing, because it would help with, as far as I can see, it would help with all of this stuff. But Rachel, I don't think that there's the distributed reads are not going to happen this week. So I think that on the back of that, and my time is short because I'm going on holiday on Friday. And so if you want to drive that, or at least get Alberto, drive it with Alberto and get that machine scaled up, like it's going to give everyone a much more peaceful Christmas or end of year time, right? And so I think we should just do that, because it was kind of an either or, and we've discovered that the or option is not going to happen in the next few weeks, and we'll probably get bogged down with the changelog. So it
can still be bigger. Now. There's still room to grow on the one server,
because it's I mean, we could put a 60 core suit. It's throttled on. I know it's not great, but the thing it's throttling on, as far as I can tell, is the CPU. So like, throw more CPU at it until we have a better solution, which is coming. It's not like we don't have answers here.
Yeah, you also would have missed at the beginning of the call, and I've said it a couple of times, so I apologize to everyone who's listening, but it just feels like continuing to do one small change at a time isn't effective. Like, we just keep doing it. Every time the triage rotation comes around, someone finds a little something that we can do that makes a difference, but makes a little dent, but we still have silenced alerts. So the reason we were discussing it in this call is because it just has to be
Are you
something
talking
different
about
we
this
can
in
do.
general or in terms of the Gidley Canary?
A Gidley Canary.
Yeah.
So there just has to be something different that we can do. So
fine.
I'm happy to carry on trying to drive this, but I see that the issue that you've linked here, that 12142, is specifically about moving it to Gitly cluster.
So if you look at the last issue that I linked with the hash ref to the note, to 12118, that's got all the options that we discussed in the call, and there's even an agenda link in there, I think, as well.
Okay, well, I'll follow the conversation.
discussions.
I'll follow the conversation on here and see what I can push forward here. It just feels like there's something different. There must be a different way to try and get through this, because what we're doing at the moment is just it's repeated work. And yes, we're making the improvements, but it just doesn't feel like it's enough.
Engage with Maren and Jav, because we had a very we spoke about this a lot on Monday in a very animated call, but I think that the Jav did actually make a change on Monday as well, which has made us. Are you taking into account the change that Jav made on Monday, because it did actually make a bit of a difference?
But that's just Canary Web, and we're talking about Canary Gitly.
Yeah. Okay, that is true, and I'm just kind of checking to see if that has still had a positive impact. Yeah, it has. So that's awesome.
Okay, so I suppose for next steps here, I think we should still write up on the issue, as Bob has described above, the conversation that we've had here about the differences between the servers, and the discussion about the marquee customers. I think it's good for everything that we've said here to be recorded on the issue, because it shouldn't just exist in this format. I'll also continue the conversation about on the issue that Andrew has linked here about what we can do with this in the shorter term. But I'm glad that we're just talking about this in a different way and seeing what else we could do here.
Andrew, while you're here,
sorry, go ahead.
You probably know this by heart. Does Marquee have different SLIs than?
No, it's the same. But Marquee, like I don't feel like Marquee is particularly tied into this, because those machines have got like 20% utilization of disks, right? And they're just idling. So they're very, very different from GitLab or GitLab. If you look at them by any measure, we've got a dashboard called Gitly Rebalancing Dashboard, which is a kind of a proxy attempt that I made to take all the different factors that we consider to be utilization and match them up. And on those, like by every measure, the marquee customer nodes are totally over-provisioned.
That's the one with the bars, right? With the million bars on it?
Yeah, and they're really bad labeling. The thing that I think the way we have to frame it is the ultimate fix for this is going to be pack files, pack file sharing or pack file caching or whatever you call it. Because this will be the biggest repo impact for that fix. Do you agree, Jakob?
It looks like it's a big chunk, but at this point, I don't know. On the one hand, I'm wildly excited about it. On the other hand, I'm a bit scared that I'm too excited. But
so I looked at kind of concurrent requests for clones as a kind of bad proxy for how effective it would be. And, so I was looking for like how many concurrent requests were going through for different repositories. And GitLab was like so high compared to everything else.
Well, if we know that the incidents are about things where the pre-clone script is failing, then is not offering enough relief, then that is exactly the problem this solves. And that's also why we came up with the idea, because we saw an incident about that. It's just that in the larger scheme of things, there's all sorts of bad things you can do to a repo on a Gitly server. And we happen to be talking about cloning now, and this should be make a very big dent in that thing, but there might be other things that are problematic.
They definitely are, but the problem is they're all being squeezed by CPU. So everything else is made worse by that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Well, we have a couple more minutes, so Sean, would you like to show us around Advent of Code?
This really wouldn't make sense in a couple of minutes. It was literally just if there was nothing else on the call.
Oh, okay.
So we can skip it.
Anything else people want to chat about in the last few minutes?
I've got something that totally is unprepared, but maybe I just run it by people. But also it stop me if you think it's not the right thing. So I'll just go ahead. So what we've got at the moment is this, for all of our metrics, we take the metrics and we use recording rules to turn them into like these recording rule SLIs in Prometheus. And then we take those SLIs in Thanos and we talk to lots of Prometheuses and we aggregate them up so that we get, you know, all of the metrics that you see here. This dashboard is a bit broken at the moment, it's in the wrong order. But all of this is being aggregated by components, service type, and we have a set of aggregations. Then we have something called like node level monitoring, and we've only turned that on for Gitly. And what that does is it gives us a different aggregation set, right? And so here we're saying, because each Gitly node is like a single point of failure, we want to kind of record our SLIs and what our error rate is on a per node basis. So we have a different set of aggregations, and that gives us all of these dashboards here. So we can look at, you know, how we're matching our service level monitoring for file 06 or, you know, file 07 or whatever. And so we have these set of recording rules that we take the base SLIs and we turn that into per FQDN aggregation set. And we also have, you know, the top level aggregations.
We sort of manually have this already for Redis, right? Because we have 3 Redis services, and this is saying Gitly is maybe 50 services, but we don't want to present it as that. So
yes, exactly. So Redis, but Redis, the workloads are slightly different, and we have different types of monitoring on them. But and then we also have at the top level, we have like the. Let me just choose a different one because this is definitely broken. But we also aggregate the service level indicators for a service up to this top level, so that we take all of the SLIs and we mix them in together and we get a top level aggregation. So there we've got 3 different aggregations. And then for each of those, we have a different function in JSON. It's like, give us the service level aggregation error charts, give us the component aggregation request chart. And so there's this like matrix of these things. And so because we're moving to Kubernetes now and we have 4 different clusters that are almost running independently, Java, and we're going to be deploying to them at different stages. So we're actually not going to roll them out at the same time. We can have different deployments in each of them. Java very much wants us to be also monitoring things at a per cluster basis. So he wants to be able to say, how is the web service doing in the US East 1C cluster, as opposed to the US East 1B? And if it's not, if that particular cluster is not managing its SLOs, we'll actually get an alert that says US East 1C is failing. We also have, you know, we roll things up by Canary. And so I just started thinking about that and all the new panels and dashboards and everything that we've got to create. And I started getting very sad because there's lots and lots of stuff. And so what I did was I took all of that stuff and I abstracted it out into what I call an aggregation set. And this is still a work in progress, but it's nearly finished. And it's reduced a lot of the code. And like, there's so much stuff that's going to be deleted from this. But effectively what it says is each set of aggregations has got its own set of metrics behind it. And then instead of saying, well, give us the charts for service level aggregation, we said, give us the request series and use this aggregation set. And then when it needs to look up what the 5-minute burn rate or the 1-hour burn rate is, you know, whichever one of the metrics it needs is, we just plug that in and it's kind of like pluggable. And then we can go from having like 20 different charts that are all very similar down to 4 charts, you know, one for errors, one for requests, and we just plug in the appropriate aggregation set into that, and it'll, you know, we get rid of that. And when we want to add the new aggregation of cluster, or we want to start aggregating by feature category, we don't need to add like another 20 charts. And just more than that, actually, just the overhead and the cognitive complexity of doing that. So what we'll have to do then is we'll just add another one of these definitions, which kind of gives all the metrics that this aggregation set will use and how it's defined. And then that will, you know, we can start adding new ones like the per cluster one without just having this explosion of code that we've got at the moment. So I don't know, it's nearly finished. And one of the things that's promising is that most of it is deleting code and simplifying code. So I'm very happy about that.
So instead of a lot of predefined named dashboards, there would be fewer dashboards with drop downs where you say what you want to see, and then you sort of get what is now a named dashboard.
No, so we still have the same, we still have the same number of dashboards, like one per service, but at the moment, right, we have a function effectively for that, and then a different function for that, and then a different, and obviously, you know, each way that we aggregate, we have a new way that a new kind of.
Is this something I see as a user, or is this something I see as a contributor to the dashboards?
As a contributor, but also one of the things that it allows us to do is much more quickly say, well, we want to slice our service level monitoring in a new way. And it's not like, okay, that's going to take me like 3 weeks to update like hundreds of dashboards. It's just kind of like plug in, define the new aggregation set, like what all the metrics are, you know, and that's, this is there. And then just plug it in, and you'll get all the graphs on the fly. And it sort of says, you know, you define what the labels are for this aggregation set in one place. So this is another thing is, you know, Ben really wants to get rid of the tier label. And instead of going through 100 places in the code, we can just remove it here. And then everywhere that we generate that recording rule, where we're using the tier label, we can get rid of it. So yeah, it's not very exciting stuff, and it's very low level, but I think it'll help us improve our monitoring going forward. So that's why I thought I'd bring it up. And there may well be other aggregations, particularly feature category in the future, that we want to slice and dice our metrics by.
Yeah, I think you're going to want to add the feature category label to some of the recorded metrics that you're
and that will become much easier now. Before it would be a pain. Cool. That's it.
Well, thanks for taking us through that. And thanks everyone for being on the call. I will upload this to YouTube Unfiltered later on. Andrew, with the shares that were on there, is there anything that shouldn't be made public?
No, there was nothing private, unless I can see something on my screen. No.
Okay.
I think it's all good.
Great. Well, I'll share that then. Thanks to everyone for joining. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.